Welcome. Today let's talk with Lars Ulrich from Germany. Ulrich has had experience in bioenergetics since 1972. Since the beginning as a social scientist, he has worked primarily in the clinical area, also in the non-therapeutic area, with top athletes, managers, pregnant women, politicians, daily stress management, and so on. Among others, he worked on these perspectives with body reading, body language, non-verbal communication, trauma and group process as a bioenergetic therapist. Hello guys, let's talk with Ulrich Sollmann. I was waiting Ulrich come in the live. Hi Ulrich, I will send an invitation to you. Welcome. That's it. Yeah. Welcome.
Thank you, and welcome again.
Yeah, it's a pleasure learn and talk with you today. I was telling to the people a little about you, but I think I told them about that you know bioenergetics in 1972, a little bit about your work, children observation, cross-cultural communication as a body psychotherapist, cross-cultural communication and cooperation, teaching bioenergetics in different cultures, ethical guidelines and practical producers, executive coaching oriented to the body of managers and politicians. You are a visiting professor at the Shanghai University of Political Science and Law. So, you wish say something, I don't know, or we can start with the questions.
So, start with your first question. Shall I talk a little about my background? Is it fine for you? Well, as a body psychotherapist, as a bioenergetic analyst and a social scientist, I work, so to say, on three legs, and I walk, or I'm grounded on three legs. The first leg is my work as a body psychotherapist. The second one is I work as a coach and consultant in management and politics. And the third one is I work in media, in the field of media, and how, the public functions, the social public, the cultural public. And I work in Germany, of course, and of course in other countries, just like Croatia or Turkey or China. And China is quite a big business for me since 10 years. So this is a very, very short way of my background. And one aspect which I want to point out is that, of course, I'm a trained bioenergetic analyst and gestalt therapist, but most important is my professional background for my studies as a social scientist, because it is very different, it has a different impact on my work as a body psychotherapist when I'm a psychologist or a medical doctor or a social scientist, because this is the basic, so to say, my basic understanding of life. And this you can always find in the way how I work.
Very nice, very interesting. As a social scientist, I think that you can contribute a lot to us. But first, let's know a little about you, okay? How did you know bioenergetic analysis, and why did you choose it?
Well, I came across bioenergetic analysis in 1972, and I started my official training in 1974. And maybe it was, there were two most striking points in my experience. On the one hand, I did not know what it was about, and I expected when I came across the bioenergetic analysis, I expected something very different. And then I came across on a sudden, just like a very big surprise, and I was so convinced and excited and convinced that I said, well, this is a road in my life, my professional and personal life, which is ever so important. The other aspect is that when I came across with Lowen and with, so to say, his first children, just like Ed Svasta, Frank Latke, and Eleanor Greenlee and others, I found out that bioenergetic analysis is ever so different. It has a basic understanding, and then you have the personal, so to say, the personal handwriting of each trainer. And this was very important for me because I did not have to follow one road. I could create my own role as a body psychotherapist, as a bioenergetic analysis. I can't hear you now.
Oh, sorry. I muted my microphone to not interrupt you. Very nice. Please talk to us about your teachers.
Well, one teacher, for example, Eleanor Greenlee, she was, so to say, a classical bioenergetic analysis. She was working in the way quite similar to how I experienced Al Lowen when he was working. And Al Lowen was, the first part was some kind of talking about my problem, my issue, and my family, my background. And then he started working on the body. And afterwards, we tried to integrate. Frank Latke, for example, he did not talk at all in the beginning. He just started and said, well, stand up, please, and just listen to your body, just be aware. And then he touched me and moved my body in a very gentle way, and I, so to say, had some inner experience, some inner approach to the issues. There were other colleagues, just like Ed Muller, for example. He was almost blind, and I asked myself, how can he work with my body when he can't really see me? And when he worked with me, he looked like this because he could only see very little from the periphery of his eyes. And it was quite strange working with someone in relation who did not look at me. But at the same time, I experienced he was very much aware of me, of myself, and what happened in my body. So you see, there are many, many approaches. And for me, it was very striking and very helpful to sort out my own way, what fits to me and how can I integrate and better understand bioenergetics and myself, the correlation, the interplay between the bioenergetic analysis and myself. And maybe I can share something else. Of course, I was trained before I came across the bioenergetics. I was trained as group analyst. So I was used to understand working with groups. So I asked Al Lowen, for example, when there was the conference, the international conference in Mexico, it was a long time ago, in '82, I think. I asked him, well, Al, how about group dynamics, group theory? And he said, well, it was not my business. I had enough to do to create the single therapy, bioenergetics as a single therapy, and working in a group, but not with a group. And he said, well, if you like, just go away and create the connection, in the better understanding of group dynamics in a bioenergetic group. So I felt welcome to join as a group analyst with a social or social scientific background.
Whoa, it's nice to me hear you about a group, because I love a group. I work with group too. How you maybe René Caes, Didier Anzier, how is the guys, the teachers in group that you follow, learn?
Yeah, well, they're mostly German teachers, And I don't know if you know the words, so it is not necessary, I think, to name the words. But when I experienced the bioenergetic colleagues, the trainers, I felt ambivalent insofar as we, of course, worked in groups, with groups. But it was single therapy in a group, but not working with a group. So working with or referring to the group was mostly, well, sharing and feedback. And that was all. So the group as a group a creature, so to say, a human living group, was not relevant insofar. And I remember one moment we had a training with one American trainer, and there was a big conflict in the group arising. And he said, and we were really aware of this, and we tried to work on this or to face it. And he said, oh, well, let's talk later, we make a break. And after the break, it was gone, of course, the dynamics were gone. So I felt more convinced to really follow this road more. And this, of course, brought me up to the way working with group analysis in the field of bioenergetics, and not working analytically and then working with group, but just to put it together. And this, of course, helped me or opened up the door, I mean the inside door, and then, of course, the door in my work when I faced different cultures. And this encouraged me to really, encouraged me to look at what happens in a person, and what happens in a group, and what happens in society. And insofar, I felt somehow connected with Wilhelm Reich. Wilhelm Reich is a very important ground of bioenergetic analysis, of course. But mostly, and this is astonishing, mostly we refer to the psychoanalyst, to the psychologist, to the psychotherapist. But Wilhelm Reich also worked socially and politically. And he was really in the political or the social political field. And I don't want to name his, he worked on, for example, in Germany on fascism, fascistic systems. And then I asked myself, where and how can we, as bioenergetic therapists, can face social issues and political issues? And being aware of this, I write and publish since many, many years about my experience about bioenergetics and so on, and body psychotherapy. And then I decided after some years, well, it is also important as a body psychotherapist, as a bioenergetic analyst, to write about the politics and to use our concepts of understanding to better understand social life and politics. And of course, then I analyzed Donald Trump while he was president. And I think it is our responsibility as a body psychotherapist also work with people on their suffering, work with people in a non-therapeutic field, with sportsmen, with athletes, with politicians, with managers, with pregnant women. And I think our concepts are very, very helpful for this. So I decided to write on this, to work in these fields, and of course to be critical on politics. I know I, as a person, I'm very little. It's just like, you just blow something and it's gone. But still, it is ever so important to be convinced as a bioenergetic analyst, and at least I am, and some colleagues also, I know this. It is very important to pick up this kind of responsibility and to face this. And this brought me up to the issue of ethics. And this is a very big issue. And of course we have ethic guidelines, but more important is the procedure, how we use those guidelines. So if there is a case coming up, and I have a lot of experience with these ethics issues in psychotherapy by myself, when an ethics case comes up, how to manage, how to face as an organization, because then we have to face ourselves. Maybe we train this person, or we have a supervision relationship to them. So how to handle an ethics case? You know, so it is not so easy to say, well, we have to face social and political responsibility. But when it touches yourself, well, sometimes my adrenaline is coming up, you know, and it's quite, well, challenging. And especially when I work, for example, in China or in Turkey, in political systems which I don't favor so much, you know? So how to work as a bioenergetic analyst in a system which is politically seen, well, not so valuable. I'm quite cautious now. So when I think of Brazil, when I was for the first time in Brazil at the conference many, many years ago, I was very much touched by your style, your Brazil cultural style of working, just moving, dancing, and you know, and expressing, and it's ever so difficult and so different. For example, well, to the German style, we are very, so both is relevant. And then I asked myself, how can it happen that in Brazil there is someone like Bolsonaro, or in America, just like Trump, or in other countries, you know? So it is, how to say, it is our responsibility, I think.
Yeah, I feel myself very happy because your words are very strong and a huge contribution to our community. You talk about a lot of subjects, William Reich, group analysis, the difference of the work with the groups. I think that we need increase this knowledge in our societies. Thank you. I will ask about the subjects maybe in 10 or 5 minutes, but I don't. We have a question. You wish answer the question now or later?
Which question? Can you ask?
Nice to meet you, Ulrich. What is your interpretation of that about the election of our leaders in different cultures?
Well, this is a very big topic. I think we have to have another interview on this topic, because I feel a little, well, I want to answer, but at the same time, it is a too big question. So, well, I can put it into 3 or 4 sentences right now, but I think it is good to have another interview on this.
Let's do other interview. It's a commitment with you and I. Let's do it. Okay?
Okay. So my experience when there was the 9/11, you know, the 11th of September 2001 in New York, the attack, the terrorist attack. So I asked myself, how can this happen that people kill themselves in order to kill other people? And then I was thinking about this. And then I experienced, it was before the attack in New York, I experienced the big war in Yugoslavia. And there were abuse, sexual abuse, babies were killed. And I asked myself, what happens to people who were my friends and colleagues one day before? I said, what happens to those people? I can understand somehow that this happens in Africa or in Iran or somewhere, but not in Yugoslavia. And then I had the idea, maybe those people they don't feel this, what we call aliveness, that somebody is alive and not dead. For example, when you have a dog, when dogs are fighting, they are biting and, expressing and being very aggressive. And when they bite here, they bite, but they don't bite the second level of skin. So the first skin is, well, I win, and you have to obey me or to follow me, but I don't kill you. Because when the second layer of skin is hit, then the other dog can be killed, can die. So they sense somehow what we call you are alive. And I fear that people lost this feeling, this sensing, It is not, well you realize when you follow somebody, when he dies, you know by sensing, oh, now his life is gone. There is some shadow or something on the face, on the skin. So you realize when somebody is dead. But how can you realize that somebody is alive? And take it as your duty and your responsibility to keep life alive and not kill it. And when I was aware of this, I asked myself, what happened in the world that this could happen? And then I realized that the globalization opened a door. I'm very short now, you must excuse me. Opened the door not to look at what really is alive, because everything is possible, or seems to be possible. I can go to Tokyo, I can go to Brazil, I can do everything. I have all the media, I can talk to you now in Brazil, you have the morning, I have noon, and so we can arrange. And so it so to say, it creates some kind of narcissistic omnipotence. And the shadow of this is I lose my sense of life, of being alive. And in German, I only have one word for this. I call it Lebenserkennungsgefühl. So the sensing of being alive, and to be aware of this, to sense this, so that it becomes a motivation for your acting. And the final aspect is people lose by this, in this process, in this world of global process, people lose their feeling of identity, not the identity. You say, I'm German, I'm Chinese, I'm Brazil, I'm American, but they don't feel what it is to be as a person, as a human being, a German or a Chinese or an American. So the better we can sense and feel our identity, and this is a hard job in our times now, the better you can sense and feel this, then you are more secure against those populist and those right-wing politicians and those dictatorship. So this was very, very short. I'm sorry.
Let's do other live about this subject. Will be very nice. Okay. About this difference, cultural difference, and social influences. How is your work? You work with Chinese, Russian, I don't know, Middle Europe. How is your work, and how did you handle with these taboos or difference?
Well, I created a lot of adrenaline in my body when I came to China. I had some information, but I found out, or I felt very soon, I felt like an ethnologist coming to an island, meeting people, don't speak the language, don't know anything about the culture, and how to get from A to B. I was helpless, and I mirrored. I experienced myself, and I felt if I was facing myself in my own mirror, and I was shocked by myself, because the wave, when I refer to I work as a bioenergetic analysis in China, and I do this for 10 years now already, many weeks during each year. And when I came there, I started as a bioenergetic analyst or a therapist in the way as I do in Europe. And Chinese people are very cute. They follow. If I say something, they do it. But this, what I expected, did not happen. So I had to ask myself very new questions, which I did not know before, questions which I did not expect them to be important. For example, to make it concrete, I started body exercises and so on. And by the time I found out, I have to start one step earlier. That means I have to get to know how do Chinese people from the cultural level, how their awareness and perception functions. And this is very different to our awareness and perception. So of course we have the same body, the same face, we have 2 arms and 2 legs and so on. We have blood pressure and we have tingling in my arms and whatever. And yet the way how we are aware of this and how we perceive this is very different. I can give you one example. There's a very good book. It's written in German, and I think there is an English version too. I can give you the title later. It is about the difference between East Asian and an Anglo-American and European way of perception. And the author talks about an experiment. There was an aquarium with fish. And American and European students looked at this aquarium, and Chinese and Japanese. And after 1 week, they were asked, well, what did you see last week in the aquarium? And I put it very simple now. The Americans and the Europeans, they were more focused on the big fish or the very colorful fish, and they started from there and were mostly more fixed somehow by this unique fish. And then they talked about the rest of the aquarium. The Chinese and Japanese, they started, oh, well, it was nice to watch this aquarium. I saw a little shell down there on the left, and it was yellow, and I asked myself, what kind of shell is it? And there were many fish. There were little fish, and there was a big fish, and so they were aware of the whole situation. So when you take those 2 different modes of perception, it has a deep impact on me as a bioenergetic analysis when I ask, for example, someone, what are you aware of when you do this exercise? And this was a big challenge and impact for me. And I did not know, this was another aspect, I did not know the, so to say, cultural sub-rules. And I call it, an under-ego. It is, you have the super-ego, the ego, the unconsciousness, and you have something which you know, but you don't know it. And this is very important in the Chinese culture. And if you ask Chinese, they can't tell you. For example, when there is a traffic, it is very chaotic traffic for me. I couldn't drive there. I like the German way. And I asked the driver, well, how can you manage to drive without damaging your car? And he said, well, I know this. And I asked him, well, how did you learn? He said, well, we have those sub-rules. And I asked him, where did you learn your sub-rules? And he said, well, in my family. And I asked him, can you tell me about your sub-rules? No, I don't know. So he he knew something without knowing, but by acting, he did not damage his car. So there is a big space of unspoken cultural knowledge, so to say. It is the same in Turkey, where I worked for a couple of years now already. And when I, for example, we do body psychotherapy master training in Istanbul at the university, and of course we talked about culture. And together with one group of students, we now make a publication on how to face culture and how is the influence of culture in body psychotherapy. And I'm very glad, and I was astonished how conscious the students were about their cultural impact on the body and on body psychotherapy. And when I look at Germany, for example, people are not so aware in the way about culture as I experience the colleagues in Turkey or in China or in Croatia. So I think it is, or another example, when I work, for example, in China, well, we are used to communication in the way as we do. And now imagine we are talking, and on a sudden, I turn around and go away without comment. What would you think or experience? Well, and after 5 or 10 minutes, I would not come back. Maybe you close the interview. Do you know what happens in China after 10 minutes or half an hour? The person returns and is very, very astonished that you close the interview because the person expected you to be there. You know, so it is a way of how to learn something about the culture, but on the other hand, to be aware of the echo, the resonance in myself. And this is even much more difficult to understand and to handle than the information about the culture. And I can put it into, well, I wrote a book about this in German. It's only in German, unfortunately. And I differentiated it into 3 aspects: communication, the intercultural, and I compare it to the learning of a language. The intercultural communication is how to handle a V-card or a book to someone. You can learn this in a seminar. It's just like learning vocabulary. The multicultural aspect is to learn about the rules or the systemic aspects. It is just like learning the grammatics. So both is very important. But when you have enough vocabulary and know about the grammatics, it is even much, much more difficult to speak, to talk, to communicate. Because you can know the language, but when you are there, you say, oh, how can I dare to open up and say something? What will the other person think about me? You know? So then this happens, what I just explained to you in this example. And this is a transcultural communication. And this is the way when you learn a language, okay, you have to jump into the water. And this is, the water is wet, it's cold. Maybe there is a little shark who bites a little on your knee or on your foot, you know, you never know. But when you want to face someone in another culture, you have to become familiar with this transcultural aspect. And for me, as a bioenergetic analysis, for example, and especially in China, it means how to face sexuality. It's a big, big issue. And I dared to offer a workshop, an open workshop to everybody on sexuality and relationship. And I was asked by some Chinese and Germans, how can you dare to open up with such an issue, with sexuality in an open workshop? And the people were glad and happy. Not happy in the way, well, now we are glad and we waited for so long that you offer this workshop. No.
Ulrich, excuse me, please. It is a very interesting subject, but I lose one word. who ask you about who says to you, wow, how you can talk about sexuality in group? Chinese guys or German guys?
German and Chinese, and especially people who, well, were quite experienced in Chinese culture. Because they said, well, it's a taboo, or it is not convenient to talk about this in public. So how can you offer a workshop where there is a public space? It's not a single therapy, but it's a public space. There are many other people in the group. And in a Chinese normal group, there are about 30 or 40 people. It is not an intimate group, like in Europe, where we have 6 or 10 or 12 people. So it is, it was shared by people who knew the culture. And of course, I hesitated myself. And I tried, well, how can I find a way not to be too open and not to be pushing, or, you know. So it took me a long time, and a time of preparation and of asking myself, how can I resonance? How is the echo before the workshop starts? How will I face? Well, I can give you one example which really shocked me. I had a lecture at the university, at the conference. And there were about 50, 80 people listening.
In Chinese?
Chinese, in China, in Peking. I was standing here. Here was my translator, and she is very familiar with me. And then there was someone with whom I demonstrated something very little, not something like Lowen did, you know. I just asked the person, can you please close your eyes for a moment? And I will not do something with you. I will not touch you, nothing. And I will give you a signal, then you can feel what happens in your body. And the signal was, I clapped in my hands. And when you close your eyes and somebody claps in your hands, it's a little surprise. And then you, of course, react bodily. Just like open your eyes, or you move somehow, or whatever. I said, okay, thank you. And she moved and opened her eyes. And I said, okay, can you please share what you experience in your body? And she started talking about her eyes, her head, some, you know, this and that. And then she wanted to start about her belly and her pelvis. And she stopped talking, sharing. I said to myself, well, is there anything else you want to share? And and then she tried to speak Chinese to my translator and not to me anymore. And then the two began to talk. And then I asked my translator, well, what are you talking about? And in that moment, my translator said, she was somehow paralyzed. She did not talk. Though she's perfect in English, she knows me. And then I said, and then I picked up, this was, I thought, my responsibility as a lecturer. And I said to everybody, well, I can imagine that it is not so easy to talk about this part in your body. I did not talk about sexuality in that moment, just this part, the belly and pelvis in your body. And then we talked a little, and then we said goodbye, and she went to her place. And do you know what happened? She picked up her things and left the room. I was shocked. Because I felt I had done something wrong. I harmed her without knowing. And then there was a very interesting discussion, because everybody in the audience knew very clearly that the issue was sexuality. So we could talk with the audience about sexuality and the taboo in China to share about this in public. I really felt sorry for this woman, for this lady. But this happened and you are not safe. You cannot avoid that this sometimes happens. And of course, it was a very big lesson learned for me. And always when well, this can happen in Germany too, or in our culture, but especially in other cultures, this can happen on a sudden. You go around the corner and wow, or you go or you open the door and you are shocked, or you are just surprised. You never know, and being aware of this is very, how to say, it is a basic ground to work in different cultures. So yeah, maybe I can put it into one sentence. I once had a lecture on this, and I also wrote an article about this. And the title is "Not the Other is Other, but I am also other for myself." So the other person, the Chinese, the Turkish, the American, is different to me. But when I'm aware of the way how I share now, then I realize, well, I don't know myself so well. There are hidden things, and I don't know, and I can't avoid that this happens. So it is easy to say, well, you as a Chinese, you as a Brazilian, you as an American, it's easy. But also I have to say, well, myself. And one experience which I remember now is when I went to India for the first time in my life. It was in 1976. I went there as a young man, psychotherapist, had done some bioenergetics. I was convinced, about wisdom, and I experienced and I hoped to meet a wise man, a wise Indian man sitting under a tree, a big tree, with long gray hair, waiting for me to tell me about wisdom and life.